welcome to the first edition of And Nothing But the Truth. I'm your host, Naamia Israel, and tonight we're talking about Shockoe Bottom. For those of you who do not live in the Richmond area, Shockoe Bottom is the lower part of the city of Richmond, which is the area where the slave trade took place. This area is more or less deserted now, and it was a big controversy about the fact that VCU had placed a parking lot on top of our ancestors, right over there by I-95. This area had slave jails, it had restaurants, it had hotels, it had bars, it had boarding houses that all had one common goal: this buying and selling of our ancestors in Richmond, Virginia. Richmond, Virginia was the #2 slave post in the United States, and every economic endeavor in the city of Richmond was a result of the profits made on the back of our ancestors. Until last year, there was a plan that had been going on for over 10 years with the cooperation of Mayor Jones to build a baseball stadium on top of our ancestors' resting ground. It was wonderful that so many people of all colors, religions, and persuasions came together against that baseball stadium being built on our ancestors. I found out about the situation about 2.5 years ago, and I became very concerned. As a student of Black history and as an African, I was extremely disturbed that that could possibly take place. So what I did is that I did a video on Shockoe Bottom. Yes, so tonight I would like to show you part of that video, and I would like you to get some history on what exactly the concern was in terms of that stadium being built on our ancestors. Right now, I'd like to introduce Marty Jewell, and he is a former city councilman and businessman and entrepreneur. Good evening, Marty.
Good evening, and I'm late.
Well, that's
so sorry.
okay.
I'm awfully sorry.
It's good to see you, Marty.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
All right. Marty Jewell was on the city council for several years, and he was an advocate for people of color, an advocate for all working people in the city. And he knows a lot about the history of Shockoe Bottom because he's an original native of Richmond, Virginia. So, Marty, tell me why we should still be talking about Shockoe Bottom at this late date, even after the decision was made not to put the stadium on top of our ancestors.
Oh, which was a marvelous decision.
Absolutely.
It seems like the good Lord just reached down and gave us some sense all of a sudden.
Yes.
And the city council backed away from that decision. And can you imagine that we would spend $80 million to put a ballpark in the bottom, yet today we don't have money to fix or build schools? When you consider that $2 million a year would be the mortgage for 15 years for a $20 million elementary school.
Wow.
Huh? We would put that kind of money in a ballpark where 80% of the fan base for the Flying Squirrels come from the county. So we would entertain our county neighbors with our children's school money. Help me with it. So, I digress, I'm sorry. Why we do need to talk about Shockoe Bottom is that it is extremely important. You hear people talk about Richmond being History City.
Right.
And Lord knows we're loaded with it.
Yes.
But the history surrounding Africans in America in Richmond is paltry at best. That is a major potential historic attraction to this city.
Yes.
That can you imagine that we would have people coming from all over the world like they do the Holocaust Museum in D.C.
Yes.
and even one here in Richmond. Thousands of visitors every day.
That's right.
If we did it right, and the whole emphasis now needs to be placed on doing it right. Sadly, the mayor sort of went behind everybody's back and decided to hire a consultant to come up with a plan to memorialize that area. And all they came up with was a museum in the footprint of this little teeny house that was uncovered down there. So it's sort of like putting the memorial of this enormous history on something the size of a postage stamp.
Right. That's right.
When in fact we had a community, the Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality, and others pulled together and had a community process where they invited the public in to give input on what should go down there. I'm not mic'd up. It's okay?
We
All right.
can hear you.
All right.
Go ahead.
To put a historical garden, a memorial park, I meant to say, that would be 9 acres as a footprint, that we can develop into something very beautiful just to begin with, while we do the archaeological digging to find out what's really down there, because we don't know. And I guarantee you there's a lot more history under the ground than there is on top of the ground once we do that archaeological research. That begins to tell us a heck of a lot more about how we got to where we are. But more importantly, it tells us who benefited down there from what was considered back before the Civil War as the largest industry in America, the sale of black bodies. Who benefited? And I can't help but believe that when you look at the history and find out that the city of Richmond, back before they built I-95, put out 2 referendums to the public as to which of 3 routes that highway should take. The totally white city council back then in the 40s wanted to take the route that we currently have. The voters twice voted against that route, saying that it would demolish, it would decimate the largest black economy in the South, called Jackson Ward.
Right.
And it did. It decimated the largest black economy. They used to call Jackson Ward, they used to call it the Black Wall Street of the South, right?
Yes.
And look at what it is today. It just ruined it. Well, twice the voters, majority white voters, said no. That city council went behind everybody's back and went to the General Assembly. And the General Assembly approved that route behind Richmond residents' back. It's the filthiest thing that ever happened, right up there in history. So, what else is down there that they didn't cover up, however?
Right.
And I'm afraid that when you look at corporate involvement, and corporate, in my opinion, has run Richmond as long as Richmond has been Richmond. Right? Corporate got involved in putting that ballpark down there. They weren't going to invest any money in it. Corporate wasn't going to get any financial benefit out of it. What was their motivation to lead the way in fighting to have the ballpark down there, except they wanted more of it covered up? And I suspect it is because if you look at law firms like McGuire Woods, one of the largest law firms in the country, right here in little old Richmond, Virginia. Sands Anderson Law Firm. huge law firm that both of them been around since before 1850. The very apex of thriving slave trade in Richmond, Virginia, in that bottom. You bet your life that they found their origins in the bottom selling slaves.
Right.
Huh?
Every last one of
I
them.
suspect they want, and I know this is speculation, it's my suspicion, but my guts don't lie to me often, that the idea is to cover up more of that because they don't want that history connected to their brand. And they're fearful of possible lawsuits.
Right.
Now, call it reparation, call it lawsuit, call it compensation for damages, whatever. The fact of the matter is, they want to cover up that area. And we got a mayor who is happy to accommodate them, sad to say.
Yes, it is very sad. Especially since he's African American himself.
Yes, yes. But there's more to say about that, and I'll have to decide whether I'll say that here or say that in other places.
All right. So what do you think about the former Governor Wilder's proposal to use the African church on Broad Street, right above where the graveyard is, as a memorial?
Anywhere in that area, it's fine to put a museum, if in fact that ever will happen.
Right.
And that building that he's identified is the precursor to First African Baptist Church,
Right.
which he is a lifelong member. And so his church has connection to that building. And if the state and the Commonwealth, Virginia Commonwealth University wants to give it to him for that purpose, that would go a long way to jumpstart him. Then we don't have to build an edifice.
Right.
We have an edifice.
We have an edifice.
To then build out a slave museum right here in Slave City.
Right.
In which that museum can proliferate. And that's not a bad move. I ain't mad at it. What we need to be mindful of, however, is that in all of the shuffling and scuffling that was done around building the ballpark down there, and with all that other development, there were promises and commitments made of millions of dollars to put into the development of a memorial down there for the enslaved people.
Yes.
That stretches from the burial ground all the way over to Main Street, right? And those millions of dollars could be controlled by the wrong people. And we need to be very vigilant and timely and urgent that we come together and advance the plans and not let those other forces control it. And I don't mind saying it. We're talking about the Slave Trail Commission.
Yes.
That is a defunct organization whose members have not only had their terms expired, but they've gone beyond their term limits. So, you know, they're term limited to 2 terms. They've been there and beyond even the limits to which they are legally allowed to do.
Wow.
Yet they, with their connection with Mayor Jones, and headed up by Delegate McQuinn,
yes,
they would control that money and give them the minimum, give that area the minimum of treatment that it deserves, as opposed to the maximum.
And that's a travesty.
That's the travesty, and that's the urgency. And so I can't remember the actual date, but a coalition of groups are coming before City Council, and I hope to pull that up shortly. I didn't bring my phone in with all that information. But it's in September, and I believe it's the second Monday of September, in which we intend to go down with the defenders, the NAACP, the Richmond Crusade for Voters.
Yes.
And there are multiple other groups that will go down before that city council demanding that they pass a resolution in support of the community drafted memorial for that area.
Right.
Again, which is 9 acres and not a postage stamp.
Right.
Right.
That's right.
That we can build a memorial park down there that can, all sorts of things can develop while it does not get in the way of the archaeology that needs to take place down there that nobody right now wants to talk about.
Right.
Who's going to pay for it? Where's it going? Well, they have allocated millions of dollars from city government and the state.
So hopefully it's still there.
$11 million.
Right. Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
That can fund the archaeology, that can fund the beautification,
yes,
that can fund, and then we need to put protective land use designations down there. It needs to be an historic designated place.
Right.
That protects it from encroachment of commercial interest, city interest, or any other interest.
That's correct.
And I'm thinking about there's a term called protective covenants. We need to put a protective covenant down there, passed by the Richmond City Council, that bars anybody to encroach on that land other than its stated purpose.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Am I clear?
Absolutely.
All right.
All right, let's go to the tape. Now let's give us 15 minutes of Shockoe Bottom Sacred Space or Economic Opportunity for those who have never seen it. The trail is on YouTube, Sacred Ground or Economic Opportunity, but now you have a chance to see it at first 15 minutes. Roll the tape, please. Baseball. It is said that this sport is American as apple pie, but in Richmond, Virginia, baseball has become an extremely controversial issue. For many years, there has been an effort to relocate the baseball stadium from the boulevard to Shockoe Bottom in Richmond. This effort, now spearheaded by Mayor Dwight Jones, who is an African American, has created many protests against it because it encompasses the area where the second largest slave trading in America occurred. During this time in Richmond, horrific acts of violence were perpetrated against the Africans brought over to America on ships, including the separation of children from their families, rape, murder, and countless unspeakable acts. The real secret of slavery in Richmond is that it became the economic base of the entire city and fueled transportation, banking, tobacco, insurance, retail, newspapers, and every other economic institution that was created. Many citizens in Richmond, both black and white, want to know how can you build a stadium on the graves of the enslaved Africans. How do you feel about the mayor's plan to build a stadium on top of our ancestors here at Shockoe Bottom?
Well, disturbed. I just believe it's a tremendous insult to not only African Americans, but to Richmond City residents and the world. The sacred ground right here where we stand, the very sign here asks, this is put up by the city, asks that no sports activities take place down in this area. This is a city sign. That you would put sports activities anywhere near here is an atrocity and a sacrilege. There's not one Confederate battlefield in Virginia that would allow commercial development to take place within a 2-mile radius of its existence. So this is insane to try and shoehorn a ballpark down here. So you got to start asking yourself, why is this? This is the third iteration in which this has taken place, and an attempt to put a ballpark down here. Why is that? Well, if you look at the history, And a lot of folks don't know this, that when back in the 50s, when I-95 was being planned, there were two attempts at taking a route that city residents rejected when they had a referendum on the question of the choice of 3 different routes that would take to run 95 through Richmond. And twice the voters rejected the route that was taken where we now see I-95. What happened was that then the General Assembly took over the question, bypassed Richmond decision making, and the General Assembly decided to run it through this undesirable route. And you gotta wonder why, when you look at the overwhelming majority of those slave jails were covered over by I-95. And then it ran I-95 right through the very heart of the largest black economy in the South. We used to call Jackson Ward the Black Wall Street of the South. And the effects are profoundly evident that that economy was virtually destroyed. And black folk have suffered economically ever since. It has ripped up in the last 50 years the very infrastructure of wealth building in this city, where we've lost our only black bank. We've lost 3 black insurance companies in the last 25 years. Properties, we haven't built a commercial building over 10,000 feet and God knows when, certainly since within the last 50 years. So there are reasons why you gotta wonder why they would want to put a ballpark down here now, which would cover the last vestige of that history, of how this nation, this city, this nation got rich on the backs of free labor, of African slaves, and some of the corporations that still exist today that were born out of the largest economy of the time that slavery took place. Slavery was the largest economy of our time back then. And so that free labor built this nation, and I suspect that there's some concerns that lawsuits could be filed on some of these insurance companies that existed back then that may have different names today, on some of the other industries that grew out of that whole operation. And so we need to be concerned about, why is it this corporate-led initiative 3 times now to cover this area with a ball field is still in our face?
One of the key fighters in the anti-stadium effort was Phil Waleto, editor of the Virginia Defender newspaper, who has been involved in the anti-stadium issue for years.
Well, we're totally opposed to it, completely opposed to it, to the point where we're collecting the names of people willing to lie down in front of the bulldozers if it comes to that. This is one of the most important sites in black history in the entire country. This was the district right here where hundreds of thousands of Africans and people of African descent were put on auction blocks, held in slave jails and pens, and shipped to the plantations of the Deep South. Richmond supplied slave labor to the rest of the country. So this could not be a more important site, not only to commemorate what happened here and honor the people who went through those terrible sufferings and the ones who resisted, which were many, but also to understand how this country developed economically, what role slavery and the slave trade played. It was indispensable. By the time of the Civil War, 1/3 of all U.S. exports was cotton. All of it grown with slave labor. Cotton supplied the South supplied 2/3 of the world's cotton. You know, cotton was king. And that was for the textile industry, the first major industrial enterprise of capitalism. So without slave labor, there would have been no tobacco industry, no sugar industry, no cotton industry. There would have been no reason to colonize North America. It was the sine qua non. And this is where, after the transatlantic slave trade was banned in 1808, this increasingly became the hub of the internal slave trade. Now, when you consider that between 1800 and 1865, some 300 to 350,000 people were sold out of Virginia, most of them from Shockoe Bottom. And by the time of the Civil War, there were only 4.5 million black people in the country. You can see that the majority of African Americans today could trace some ancestry to this small area right here, and this is where they want to put a baseball stadium. Now that only means one thing. They don't think that history is that important. Whether it's the mayor, or whether it's H. Louis Salomonsky, the biggest developer in the project, who bought Wyman's Bakery over here before the deal was announced, before the proposal was announced, so he could have a little bit of the property that was supposed to be home base. These people don't care at all about history, and they don't care at all about developing a historic tourism site. They don't want to bring millions of black people to Richmond. They want this to be a yuppified, white, empty nester, exclusive community, and that's not me saying it, that's H. Louis Salomonsky, who gave an interview on WRAR radio and said that that would be the solution for Richmond. When minorities and their families move out of town, replaced by empty nesters making $100,000 a year. Now, if that isn't profound disrespect, and this is the white developer that our black mayor, Dwight Jones, is promoting. We are totally opposed to a stadium in Shockoe Bottom. We think this should be a historic district. Doesn't have to be the whole thing. No one's saying that every place that dealt with slavery has to be preserved. You'd have the whole city. All we're saying is that where they got Lumpkin's jail site over there that they know exists, the African burial ground that we and others reclaimed from a parking lot run by VCU, which dominates the skyline over there, and just 2 more blocks. 2 more blocks between the railroad and 17th Street, between Grace and Broad. Just 2 blocks, valued at $2.6 million. Combine that with what already exists on the other side of the track, you've got 8 square blocks, make it into a memorial park, and then have a community discussion on how it should be developed. We don't need $30 million for a museum. We need $5 million to buy the land and landscape it, and then start the process. Seems reasonable, and in the long run, the tourism would bring more money into the city, with people staying in hotels and restaurants, than a minor league ballpark, which draws 70% of its fans from the nearby counties who come in, buy a hot dog, have a beer, and go right home. It's not rocket science. And that's why a lot of people are wondering what's really going on behind the scenes, and who's going to stand to make money, and who's benefiting from this behind closed doors.
Anna Edwards, a community activist and co-editor of the Virginia Defender, had this to say. Can you tell us about your organization's efforts to stop the stadium in Shockoe Bottom, and also can you tell us about what's been going on in City Hall to stop the anti-stadium?
Well, our organization is sort of 2. There's the Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality, and in 2004, with the establishment of the historical marker to commemorate the life of Gabriel and Gabriel's Rebellion, we also formed the Sacred Ground Historical Reclamation Project. And at that point, the purpose of that project was to work on the reclamation of the burial ground itself, which until 2011 was under a parking lot that was owned by VCU. We also were promoting the story of Gabriel's Rebellion because we felt like the history, the African American history, the black history, the African history of Shockoe Bottom was not well enough known. It certainly wasn't in our school system, but just generally in talking to people, they just weren't that familiar with it. And so we felt like it was important for the idea of self-determination that we have that knowledge about our own history, and such a heroic history here in the city of Richmond we felt was very important for people to have. So as that progressed, and we were working primarily, like I say, on an educational campaign and on a sort of community political awareness campaign, the first iteration of a baseball stadium development project came to Richmond, and that was in 2004 and 2005. And we immediately took a stand opposing that development, and fortunately it failed. It came up once again in 2009, much larger, and actually I thought much smarter on their part in terms of the way that they were willing to work with people to do public meetings and hear people's thoughts on how it should go and how it should not go. In the end, though, there was still a stadium planned for the area that we're talking about, and then fortunately, because of finances and this public pressure, that one failed. It came back again. Of course, this is the struggle we're in right now with the city of Richmond as represented by Mayor Jones and his promotion of a project called Revitalize Richmond, or Revitalize RVA. We have taken the same consistent position that not only do we still not know enough about what is down here, the research has not been done, even to this point, and really we are, I feel very strongly that there's a lot of good that's coming out of the struggle itself. No matter what the end point is going to be, some of the pieces along the way, some of the realizations along the way have been incredibly important. And some of that includes the fact that people have been forced to do the research that has not been done before. Most of it has been an evaluation of existing research, but now they're starting to understand that we need new information based on this old information, that we, like so many other sites that have turned out to be archaeologically, historically, and culturally important, we know enough now to know that we need to know more. And that's what this area begins to represent for us as we struggle to prevent the kind of development that would eradicate it before we would have a chance to do that. And even the mayor's contractor, which was hired about 2 months ago, apparently, although he didn't tell anyone that until about, I think last month, that there was going to be this archaeological review. Even they have found that the footprint of this development project includes significant historic sites that give us the feasibility, give us the reason why we would want to know more. So there's that. And then there are all the other myriad reasons why this struggle that seems to be going on between City Council and the mayor's office, as impacted by public input on this project, is very important, because it's been exposing the fact that the process by which big development projects happen in a city like Richmond happen out of sight, without really, without actual public input, or if it is public input, it is the kind that can be dismissed very easily. They take a note, they mark you your attendance, you were here, you said something, thank you very much, we'll take that under consideration, but the truth is that they want to go ahead with their plan as they have designed it. So this struggle has really exposed many layers at which we should be looking at it as opportunity. We should be understanding that it is our public voice that has forced this change, because City Council representatives are accountable to the voters. They are accountable to the constituents in their districts. Collectively, they are responsible to the city at large. And of course, the mayor is elected at large. And they're starting to realize that, actually, I'll take that back. It's not that they're starting to realize, they are being confronted with what they knew all along, is that if they engage the community's voice would matter. And that's where we are. And I think this is a fantastic point for us to be at, because the people get to recognize that when they step up, when they lend their voice, and when they're organized about it, they can have the impact that they are after.
Ken Allen, a cultural anthropologist, also weighed in on the subject of the African burial grounds. What has been your involvement in the Shockoe Bottom Stadium issue as a cultural anthropologist?
As a cultural anthropologist, well, my initial involvement was as the president of the Richmond branch of the NAACP. That's when I initially got involved. And
welcome back to And Nothing But the Truth. We're talking about Shockoe Bottom, and we're talking about the need to continue to be vigilant about what goes on down there concerning the history of our ancestors. And we're going to open up the phones right now with any questions or comments that you might have. You can see the number on the screen. Please call and state your concerns or your comments about what was being said earlier about Shockoe Bottom. The phone line is open, y'all.
Well, I hope that number was up during the time that we spoke in the opening of the show, so that people could, in fact, know that they can call in. I'd love to hear some feedback from your audience.
I would love my audience to...
What they think ought to go down in Shockoe Bottom. What do you think that would attract you if you not only live here, but you live out of the city? And you've got an opportunity to learn about the slavery history of this city, who was involved, how did it work, the fact that importing slaves was outlawed decades before the Civil War, and so Virginia actually bred slave children.
Yes.
Now, how do you breed humans? How do you do that? What mechanisms do you use to do that? And who chooses whom to be bred with whom? And all this cross-membering of people that some of whom are family.
Yes, they were.
And then as we bred them, we grew them up, fattened them up, dressed them up, sold them off to the Deep South, and split them up. Split up those families in ways that is just unconscionable.
And the effects of that are still being felt today because
Yes.
people don't know who their family members
That is
really
exactly
are.
right. That is exactly right. I spent 5 months in Ghana. Well, I had a professor of sociology who was white at Virginia Union 100 years ago, who was amazed at what he saw as the kinship ties among black young people going to school at Virginia Union, how close we seem to be when we're from all over the country, never knew each other before coming here, yet you link up and you have such camaraderie, such closeness, almost as if we were kin.
Yes.
Well, he was from the Midwest, from a white community. He had never seen that before. Well, I contend that that was the village that we talk about, and that those kids were brought up in the village. It does take a village to raise a child.
Yes, it does.
And it did. And so when I went to Ghana for 5 months, I learned that those kinship ties were thicker, 10 times thicker over there
Yes.
than they were over here,
Right.
where in fact they called their cousins brother and sister,
Yes.
where in fact they have annual homecomings in the village. People don't know that most African nations still today have most of their population in the rural areas, not in the city,
Right.
like we have here.
Right.
The largest part of their population is still in the rural areas. So every year they go back and have their festivals in their village.
Right.
Where they have their king, they have their interpreter, they have their minister, right? Or their religious person, and they hold ceremonies. They send people from their village to the city and provide them housing to be an outpost for villagers who are traveling through the city who may need to be put up overnight. They can always go to that person's house and stay overnight before they go back to the village.
Isn't that beautiful?
It is beautiful. There, they don't have universal free education. You got to pay school fees. In Ghana, and I suspect in a lot of other African countries, the eldest child is responsible for the youngest child's firstborn school fees.
Wow.
From cradle to grave.
That's amazing.
That's powerful.
It's very powerful.
Because by the time you reach age 10, you know enough about your world to know that you got this enormous responsibility for someone yet unborn, meaning that I need to take my education real seriously.
Really?
Right here, right now, my education now has meaning.
Yes, it does.
And is driven by a requirement that is built into my culture. That's powerful.
That's very powerful.
And I'm mighty afraid that in too many ways, our children are failing in education because they don't have an end game. They are learning in a vacuum, and no one or very few are providing any kind of goal orientation for them to take this education seriously and plug it into something that I think I choose to do one day.
Right.
I think I choose to do one day. Now, you can always change it as life goes
Of course.
on, but it's important to have some goal in your life in any human enterprise, especially in education.
Absolutely.
It's kind of scary that we don't.
It is. I think we have a caller. And nothing but the truth. What is your question or comment?
I think he's supposed to hit that green button.
It cut off. Hang it up.
Hang it up.
Tell him to call back.
Okay, call back in about 1 minute because we're having a little technical. Please call back, okay? About 1 minute.
Don't pick it up. Just push that button on the bottom right.
Which, this right here? Okay.
Okay.
Don't pick it up, okay. Thank you.
Caller, please call back.
Yes, please call
we're
back.
getting used to these phones over here.
Yes, first
and
time.
Did not mean to cut you off. Please call us back. We want to hear your input.
Absolutely.
That's democracy at work.
Yes, it is.
When we get your input, we can take that input down to those round tables that we have occasionally where we're able to craft a vision and come up with strategic plans. And your idea is as good, maybe better than most. But we talked about putting a genealogy center down there.
Wow.
I don't know how many of you look at PBS, in which they had this genealogy show where people get assistance from the host on telling them what their DNA background
Henry
is.
Louis Gates.
Henry Louis Gates, absolutely.
Yes.
That's an astonishing show. I don't
Yes,
miss
it
it
is.
whenever it comes on. I haven't seen it lately. But people need to know who they're connected to.
That's very important.
And talking about connectedness, I contend that it was our connectedness, our village concept, that was the very power that got black people through 400 years of hell and headache.
Yes, indeed.
It was the power of our connectedness that we built that village, that where neighbor knew neighbor by name, knew each other's children's names,
Yes.
very important,
Very important.
and were committed to take care of one another.
That's right.
That is what sustained us. We didn't have any money.
Right.
Coming out of
Nobody.
slavery, we had nothing.
Nothing.
Maggie Walker, in her age, in her era, at the end of the 20th century, became head of the Independent Order of St. Luke.
Yes.
It was a benevolent society. Well, they had tons of benevolent societies all around that these were black folk helping black folk get stabilized coming off of the plantation.
Yes.
Now free, but with nothing to build on. No
Right.
financial resources, no sustainable kinds of enterprise or income. You were just there, out here on your own, except what neighbors were able to do for you.
Right.
The old borrow the cup of sugar from your neighbor
Yes.
comes into mind. Well, that's where all that came from, and it was done willingly.
Yes. Out of your heart.
Yes, I understand the Koreans have something, and I really need to double check. It's not chi, but it's something on the order of chi, where they're required. You can go knock on a Korean's door every day and collect 38 cents. They have to give it to you,
Right.
right? And you can save those 38 cents until you can now not walk, but then get a bicycle
Right.
and knock on more doors than you did when you were walking.
Right.
And then you can buy a motorcycle.
Isn't that something?
And then you can buy a car. And eventually you save that money, and you accumulate the money, save it, and there is a council that will lend you the portion of money you need to start a business, right?
That's amazing.
Yes, that council will lend you based on how much of the total amount you've been able to save. Well, we had those similar kinds of things
Yes, we
with
did.
the benevolent societies, and each of those societies had a benefit to membership called burial insurance. Burial insurance. There is no greater sin that I believe one can commit in the black community anywhere else, that you die and leave the cost of your burial to your family. Why would you do that when, in fact, burial insurance is relatively inexpensive and it covers only your burial?
Right.
But today, the average burial cost is up around $7,000 to $8,000.
Yes, it is.
Why would you leave that burden on your family? We've got to build community wealth all over again.
Absolutely.
We did it before. And that community wealth begins with recognizing that we are each other's greatest assets. And so we need to reestablish that initiative. That until they pour dirt on me, I intend to lead in building black community wealth.
Yes.
Black folk got money. Even poor folk got money. They don't keep it long.
Right, but they get it.
But we got money.
Yes, indeed.
Yet we have no wealth. That's what's missing. And no wealth, no power. No power, you can't fix any of the long list of social ills that you can tick off the top of your head right now.
True.
And so our wealth quotient took a huge beating during the 2008 financial crash. The Pew Research Center tells us that black folk in America lost 45% of our collective wealth with that.
Wow,
with that crash.
that's devastating.
That's a huge number.
That's devastating.
And most of it, of our wealth, was in our equity in our homes that went underwater, right?
That's right.
And our 401ks
Yes.
that went underwater. I mean, vaporized right before our very eyes. And we're the last ethnic group to recover from the 2008 crash.
That's the truth.
So we're in pretty bad shape.
Yeah.
We need to build economy.
Yes, we do.
Economics is the most neglected dimension of black life. Well, that slave memorial park that we're talking about is an opportunity to begin to build wealth through revenue streams that can be put down there as it attracts people from all over the world.
Yes, indeed.
And so art is important
Yes.
to economy. History is important to economy.
That's right.
Education is important to economy. That's where you hone your talent that is saleable as any commodity that you can think about.
Certainly.
And so we need to start thinking differently about our talents and who we are and what we really got. And at this stage of the game, as deeply in trouble as we are economically, we need to take on what a good friend of mine, Ilya Davis, I've heard him say that if it don't make dollars, it don't make sense.
Right.
We got to be about building financial wealth, although human capital is equally important.
Yes, it
And
is.
so we need to organize and come back into relationship with each other around lifting up the best life chances for our children.
Right.
Again, community wealth building is about organized money, organized talent, organized assets. Our children are our greatest assets.
Yeah.
Huh?
That's right. And we only have a few minutes left, so you guys that are watching on 95, please make an effort to call. Unfortunately, one call was not handled correctly, but we're up to speed now, so make an effort to call and reach out and give us your comment on what we're talking about, whether it's black economics or cultural pride, especially in reference to Shockoe Bottom. Please call.
I'm Marty Jewell. I'm here with my friend Dawn Smith, or she has me here. I'm happy to be her guest, magnificent hostess. And you're going to be doing this show on Wednesdays for how long?
For the next 5 weeks. This is the first show, and I get 5 more weeks in the rotation. And next week we're going to be talking about Martin Luther King Middle School and what we can do to make it better for the 2016 to 2017 season. Also, we're going to be talking about positive. Go right ahead. Nothing but the truth. Question or comment?
Yes, this is a comment, nothing but the truth. The inhabitants of Africa are the descendants of the ancient Canaanites from the land of Canaan. Old man Cush and his family are the first inhabitants of of Africa who came from the land of Canaan. His father Ham and his family were second. Then came the word Ethiopia, which means the demarcation line of the dominion of Amexium, the first true and divine name of Africa, the dividing of the land between the Father and the Son. The dominion of Cush, northeast and southeast Africa, and northwest and southwest was his father's dominion of Africa. Now, I'm saying this to let you know that you're a long ways off from this part, but you are looking at a country in which was divided from Africa by the Atlantic Ocean earthquake. But the people here are still Africans, and you're looking to say that we came from someplace else across the water. That may be true of a small few of us, but most of us were already here. Now, what you know of Virginia is that Virginia was colonized, and that colonization looked to overthrow the Philadelphia area in which it did. It established a whole new area, but you're looking at what occurred to basically the people here that were enslaved. Now, the nationality that he was talking about Virginia Union, and I guess the love that you have. When people know their nationality, that love is called nationalism. And until the people find out about who they are as a people truly, because the nationality of the Moors was taken away from them in 1774, and the word Negro, black, colored, and Ethiopian was applied to people that are of Moorish descent. Now, a lot of people don't realize that there are Moors here, but the word Moors goes back to, in the Bible, to the fact that Ruth was a Moabitess, and the modern name for Moabites is Moors. Now, you don't see that or people talk about that, but that's the truth of what's going on. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of the mandates that the European nations that came here had are all out, and they're looking to become a part of the nations that are here.
Okay.
So they are doing a lot of amalgamation. But you're talking about things that have occurred to us, and we do need to know what occurred to us, know how to put things back together.
Paula, would you give us the source of your historical citation?
The source of my historical citations is the Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple of America, given to us by Prophet Nobudu Ali, who was sent to teach the people that had lost their nationality through exactly what you're speaking about, all those things about the children being taken away and not knowing anything because they were raised someplace else. And it took the prophet to come back here and tell us about who we are.
Okay, thank you, but we got to go to another call, ma'am. Thank you so much, and please tune in next week.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye. Okay, we got 3 minutes. Let's hear from another caller, please.
They hung up.
Oh. Okay, we got 3 minutes, y'all.
Call us back, caller.
Call us
we
back,
didn't mean to
caller.
hold you that long. Please call back.
Yes. Also, I'd like to make an announcement about some upcoming events. This weekend, of course, everybody knows is the Jazz Weekend, and that's taking place at Maymont. There's 2 free events on Thursday, which is at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, a fusion band, and also at Hardywood Cafe from 6 to 7. And the following weekend on the 20th, we're going to have the Down Home Reunion. And Nothing But the Truth. Questions or comments, please?
Hey, Mr. Marty Jewell.
Yes.
Look, I don't know if you remember me, but I remember you from back with Alabama.
Yes.
I'm doing what you doing, bro.
Who am I talking to?
Fighting for the people. My name George.
Joyce.
George Thompson.
Yes. How you been, Precious?
Huh?
How have you been?
I've been good. I've been all right. I've been good. But you keep on doing what you're doing.
I sure appreciate you, baby.
Fighting for the people.
I ain't going nowhere. We gonna keep on fighting. I was telling somebody early today, name me one thing of value that black folk have ever gotten in America that they didn't have to fight for.
Right.
So what make us think we can sit on our hands now and wait for something to come our way? You got to fight.
Yes, and don't wait for anything out of the sky, because that's not happening either.
That's right.
Better deal with it right here and right now.
I'm
Thank
glad.
you for your call.
But we do got to give God thanks.
That's
We got
correct.
to give
Yes.
God thanks because them slaves had God that made it through. They praised God. They took God, had God
Yes,
with
they
them.
did.
We will fight the fight that God has put in us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, baby.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
All right, sister, you have one too. Y'all have one.
All
Thank
right.
you. There's also an event next Saturday at the Gothwood Playhouse at 600 East Gray Street by the Children from Art 81 at 6 o'clock.
Hold on.
Center stage is free.
Hold on, let me hear. What you said is because I had to turn the TV down. I heard change from y'all. I want to turn the TV down, but so I'm not hearing it. Now, what are you saying?
It's an event for the Children from Art 81.
30 seconds.
Okay, I have to go. Have a nice evening. I'd also like to encourage those of you that would like a copy of the tape to give me a call at 804-986-5359. And
Say it again.
804-986-5359 to get a copy of Shockoe Bottom. It's a must-have. The real history of why we should be concerned about Shockoe Bottom. Thank you very much. Tune in next week for another edition of And Nothing But the Truth. Y'all have a blessed night.